Al Capone is the prototypical celebrity gangster. He's bigger than Chicago.
Around the world, people knew who he was. You tell somebody you're from Chicago, and what do you get? Oh, Chicago, da-da-da-da-da.
He ruled a city from the shadows. His name terrified rivals, corrupted cops, and fascinated the public. He was charming and ruthless, dangerous yet oddly charismatic. When people talked about crime, they talked about him. Al Capone was not just a gangster. He was a brand, a myth, a symbol of how power can build you up and destroy you just as quickly. This is the story of how an ambitious kid from Brooklyn became the king of Chicago, and how the same empire that made him untouchable eventually brought him down. Let's go back to the beginning. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were Italian immigrants who came to America looking for a better life. They worked hard, ran a small barbershop, and tried to raise their son the right way. But young Al was drawn to the streets. The rules were simple there. Respect, money, and reputation meant everything. By his teenage years, Capone had already joined a street gang. He got into fights, hustled for cash, and learned how power worked. Not through school or books, but through fear and influence. One of his early mentors was Johnny Torrio, a man who would later become one of the most influential figures in organized crime. Torrio taught him strategy. He showed him that violence alone would not get you far, but smart business would. Then came the move that changed everything.
The perfect name for Johnny Torrio was the Fox. He was cagey. He was very, very, very meticulous.
With his extortionists dead and Torrio's protection, Big Jim Colosimo lived it up.
In 1919, Capone left New York and moved to Chicago to work under Torrio. The timing could not have been more perfect. Prohibition had just begun. Alcohol was illegal, but the demand for it never went away. If anything, it grew stronger. And where there is demand, there is profit. Capone quickly saw opportunity. While ordinary citizens were struggling, Capone was building a business empire, bootlegging alcohol, running speakeasies, bribing officials, and eliminating competitors. He was not just making money, he was building an underground economy that rivaled legitimate industries. His operations were massive. He employed hundreds of people, controlled supply chains, and made millions every year. But what made him stand out was his image. Capone understood publicity. He wore sharp suits, tipped well, and donated to charity. The newspapers called him Scarface, a nickname he hated but one that made him even more famous. He threw lavish parties, posed for photos, and became a celebrity. People feared him, but they also admired him. He seemed untouchable. Behind the charm, though, was chaos. Capone's empire ran on violence. Every major gang in Chicago wanted a piece of the bootlegging trade, and Capone made sure no one got in his way. The streets turned into war zones. The most infamous of these moments came in 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 members of a rival gang were lined up against a wall and shot in cold blood by men dressed as police officers. The public was horrified. Although there was no direct proof linking Capone to the murders, everyone knew who had ordered it. That single event changed how America saw him. The legend of the charming bootlegger turned into the image of a cold-blooded criminal. Politicians who once ignored him started calling for his arrest. Law enforcement, embarrassed by his power, decided enough was enough. But catching Al Capone was not easy. He had connections everywhere. Judges, police, and city officials were all on his payroll. Witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished. He seemed immune to the law. That is, until the government changed its strategy.
They thought they could get him on taxes, but even that was a very hard case to make because Capone was smart in this way. He kept no books. He had no bank accounts. He owned no property except for a house in Florida that he bought in his wife's name. He did everything in cash, and he seemed to pay out almost as much as he was taking in. It made it almost impossible for anybody to prove that he had income. The first time he sat down with the IRS and tried to settle, he admitted that he hadn't paid his taxes all these years. He said, I really didn't make a lot. I don't have a lot of money to claim. I've been just delivering beer, supplying beer. I'm a public servant, he said. I'm just doing it for the good of the people.
They could not get him for murder or smuggling, so they went after his money. In 1931, Capone was charged with tax evasion. It seemed ridiculous at first. A man responsible for hundreds of illegal deals brought down by something as boring as unpaid taxes. But it worked. Federal agents had quietly built a case against him. They tracked his income, found fake books, and exposed the empire he had hidden behind legitimate businesses. The same arrogance that made him flaunt his wealth became his downfall. When Capone went to trial, he expected his money to protect him like it always had, but this time it did not. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. And just like that, the King of Chicago was gone.
It was my own fault, Capone said. Publicity. That's what got me.
I think the general feeling was that he deserved it. There's a sense he was guilty of a lot of other things, and that society would be better off if he were behind bars.
Prison was brutal for him. He was transferred from one facility to another before finally ending up in Alcatraz, the island prison built for the most dangerous men in America. There, his power meant nothing. He was no longer the boss giving orders. He was inmate number 85. Over the years, his health started to decline. The syphilis he had contracted years earlier began to affect his mind. By the time he was released in 1939, Al Capone was a shadow of the man he once was. His speech was slow, his memory fading. He spent his final years quietly in Florida, far away from the city he once ruled. He died in 1947 at the age of 48. The newspapers that once celebrated him now wrote about his tragic end. Some saw it as justice, others saw it as the inevitable price of living too close to the edge. But even in death, Al Capone's story refused to fade. He became a legend in popular culture. Movies, TV shows, and books portrayed him as both villain and anti-hero. People could not stop talking about him because his story captured something deeper about human nature: the temptation of power and the illusion of control. Capone's rise was not just about crime, it was about ambition. He came from nothing, built an empire, and lived life on his own terms. But his fall showed the cost of unchecked greed and ego. The same brilliance that helped him outsmart everyone eventually blinded him.
Capone later boasted,
"I give the public what it wants. I never had to send out high-pressure salesmen. I could never meet the demand."
It is strange to think about how he became such a cultural symbol. Even today, his name is used as shorthand for organized crime. But what made him stand out was not just his violence. It was his understanding of image. Capone lived in an era before social media, yet he mastered self-promotion better than most modern influencers. He knew that being talked about, even negatively, was power, and he used that to control the narrative for years.
He also tried to justify his actions by portraying himself as a Robin Hood figure.
This guy we're taking out, he's a real bad dude, huh?
Nah, he owns a charity. That's the money we're getting.
But it's one of those kind of poorly run charities, right? Where a lot of the funds kind of end up in...
No, it's one ward.
So he offered free therapy to the family members of everyone he killed.
He built a brand before anyone used that word. He made headlines, shaped public opinion, and turned his own story into a myth. It was marketing in its rawest form, and it worked until the truth caught up to him. In many ways, his story mirrors the rise and fall of every empire built on illusion. The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and when the fall comes, it is fast and unforgiving. Capone's downfall was not just the end of one man. It was a turning point in how America fought organized crime. After him, the government learned to follow the money. Law enforcement became more sophisticated, and the age of flashy gangsters began to fade. But for all the fear he inspired, there is no denying the fascination he still holds. His story makes people question morality and success. Can power ever exist without corruption? Can ambition ever exist without greed? Maybe that is why his name still lives on, because Al Capone was more than just a criminal. He was a mirror reflecting the darker sides of the American dream. The hunger to win at any cost, the belief that cleverness can outsmart consequence, and the tragic truth that even the smartest players eventually lose. When we look back now, we see more than just crime. We see a story about a man who wanted everything and lost it all because he believed he could never fall. It is easy to judge him, but his story forces us to ask deeper questions. What would we do if power came that easily? Would we resist the temptation or fall into the same trap? Maybe that is the real reason Al Capone's story never dies, because deep down it is not just about him, it is about us, about human nature, ambition, greed, and the illusion that we can control it all. The rise and fall of Al Capone is a warning written in history. It reminds us that the same fire that fuels success can also burn everything you have built. In the end, Al Capone wasn't just a gangster, he was a mirror reflecting the chaos, greed, and contradictions of his time. A man who built an empire on vice, ruled with charm and fear, and fell not to bullets but to bookkeeping. His story is a reminder that power built on corruption always carries its own countdown. The city moved on, the world changed, but the legend of Scarface never really died. It still lingers in the shadows of Chicago, whispering that even kings of crime are just men, mortal, flawed, and destined to fall.